Can I have Grandma Susan's brave candy? Sophie asks from the end of the table like a small fuse lit under dry tinder, and the sound cuts through my Sunday roast like a thrown glass. Jessica freezes mid-chew, a fork slipping from her fingers and clattering onto the plate with a hard, ringing note. Sophie bolts from her chair before I can breathe, her feet thudding across linoleum, a little comet aimed at the kitchen. Cabinets slam like closing trapdoors, and I hear the precise, horrid crackle of a plastic bag being opened, small, bright, obscene. I stand because standing is the only thing that feels like motion, and I hear the peanuts hit the counter. A dry staccato rain that sounds to me like counting down seconds. My mother-in-law, Susan Martin, lifts the jar lid with a patient, almost ceremonial ease. The metallic scent of the spice jar being unscrewed cuts the warm roast and butter smell the house normally holds on Sundays. She looks up at us with the calm of someone who has rehearsed this line, and she says, without a tremor, it helps her toughen up. You're allergic, I say, because saying the fact out loud makes it real and because I cannot find any other sound that fits the moment. The words land with no theatrics, but they ricochet anyway. Jessica's knuckles go white on the table edge and her eyes go raw and wide. Sophie turns, smiling like she's been let in on a secret we are all supposed to share, as if bravery is candy and bravery is sugar and bravery is something you can hand to a 5-year-old in a paper cup. Susan keeps that same calm. Her hands are steady as she scoops the powder into tiny clusters and presses them into a cookie like a baker icing with a religious zeal. It's not much, she says, as if she is describing the weather. Tiny amounts, just to get her used to it. Exposure is good, builds tolerance. I don't scream, screaming is private, this is public. I move without thinking, more muscle memory than plan, and reach the counter before I can tell myself not to. The bag is warm from being handled, the plastic crinkles under my palm and clings like a wet thing. I catch the crumbs of peanut on my fingers, and I can taste their metallic tang against my tongue even though I've never eaten them. Fluorescent light from the stove hood makes Susan's face harder, a small face lit like a stage. Jessica grabs my wrist so tight it hurts, anchor and accusation rolled into one. My voice comes out too quiet, too flat. You knew she was allergic. It is a question and a charge, and the whole room condenses until those words are the only gravity. Susan's answer is clinical, practiced, and steady. I kept a little log, small amounts, not a big deal, it helps her toughen up. The paper she slides across the counter is off-white and dogered, a small notebook with columns and numbers and dates that make my stomach drop like lid. The handwriting is neat, no flourishes. June 9, 1.5 mg peanut in cookie. August 21, 2.2 mg, playground day, mild vomiting. I am reading digits and dates, watching them rearrange every late night at the ER in my head into a pattern I didn't want to see. Sophie is laughing now, a light, unbothered sound, reaching for the cookie with an open, trusting hand. Her smile is the thing that both ruins me and steals me. A small, bright thing I will move mountains for, and a soft body that someone has been poking at like a patch of old scar tissue to see if it still bleeds. The kitchen turned into a crime scene before I even knew I was the detective. Jessica and I moved like a two-person wrecking crew, hands on cabinet doors, elbows slipping on glass, the house filling with the garbage smell of old peanuts and warm bread. I grabbed a cinnamon tin off the counter because it rattled wrong, a hollow thunk that didn't belong in a tin that usually held nothing but spice. I tipped it and a few granules fell out, darker than cinnamon, powder that clung to my skin. It smelled like peanuts and dust and someone else's kitchen, like a betrayal that had been drying behind a spice rack for months. We ripped through jars the way you tear through paper when you're looking for a secret note. A supplement bottle hid behind the vitamin jars, plastic cloudy with fingerprints. When I unscrewed it, a fine pale dust rose up and coated my knuckles, peanut dust, unmistakable, sweet and metallic at the same time. Jessica gagged and turned her face away, but Sophie kept laughing like nothing odd was happening, like bravery was a game and she had won. I held the bottle to my nose and felt a weird, sick clarity, like someone had switched the lights on in my head. I could no longer pretend these were accidents. Behind a chipped flour canister, wedged where crumbs collect and nobody looks, I found the spiral notebook. It was small, pages dog-eared like it had been handled a lot. Susan's handwriting filled it in tidy lines, dates on the left, numbers in the middle, and brief notes on the right. The page I opened to said Jun 9, 1.5 mg peanut and cookie, Jun 23 playground, 1 mg, no reaction. Another entry said Aug 21, 2.2 mg, playground day, mild vomiting. The entries were clinical, like someone charting a patient rather than a grandchild. Each line had a shorthand I could read bluntly, the dose, the context, the reaction. There were little ticks and checks next to certain dates like awards for success. I flipped through the spiral so fast my thumb blurred. There were entries I recognized in visceral ways. A Saturday afternoon with a note about mild stomach, playground excitement where Sophie had been sleepy the next day. There was a Jun 9 entry with 1.5 mg that made me think of the night I can barely remember but we have a timestamp for in my mind, a cold blue clock face on the ER wall reading 1:30 a.m. My wife and I had carried Sophie through fluorescent lights and held her little body while nurses moved like surgeons. I remembered being told it might be an allergic reaction, that we needed to watch her. I remembered exhaustion and an upset stomach and nameless fear. The notebook had the exact date, the exact thing, and a line next to it that said reassured small dose. The pattern hit like a fall of rocks. I started matching the entries to flashes in my memory. The late Tuesday fever that sent us back twice to urgent care, a rash we thought was viral until Dr. Cortez said we should be careful. The day Sophie slept through her preschool pickup and came home pale and listless. Every forgotten ER sticker, every quick call to a pediatrician at 1:30 a.m., every hurried text to a babysitter showed up in neat handwriting claiming it wasn't a big deal. My hands shook not from adrenaline, but from the calm, ugly arithmetic of evidence lining up like dominoes. The notebook didn't feel like malice so much as obsession, a project where Susan played scientist and Sophie was the subject. I did what felt mechanical and right. I photographed every page with my phone at 7:42 p.m., camera flash chopping the handwriting into hard light. I put the cinnamon tin and the supplement bottle into Ziploc bags, sealing them with the same hands that had burned toast that morning. I labeled the bags with a Sharpie because labels are proof, and proof is what you need when a story crosses into the legal world. Jessica stood by, silent, folding and unfolding her hands until her nails were white. Sophie watched us work like she watched a show, all eyes and no comprehension. Susan watched us too, with the same flat, practiced face she'd had since she slid that first note across the countertop. There was a moment when I thought I might lose it. I pictured every small kindness Susan had ever done twisting into a map of intent, little doses, little tests, a cruel education handed out in cookies. But instead of breaking, I cataloged. I wrote down the dates from the spiral into my notes app, cross-referencing them with texts from nights I couldn't fully remember. I checked the comments section of the family calendar and found timestamps for doctor's visits. October 12, 1:30 a.m. ER. June 9 matched the notebook entry with a precision that felt like a guilty verdict. I kept moving because movement felt like control, because gathering proof felt like building a wall between my daughter and whatever motive had been behind those small, dangerous doses. By the time the kitchen had gone from chaos to locked evidence, the house was quieter. The metal taste of adrenaline receded. I held the spiral notebook to my chest like something heavy and humming, my head full of dates and doses and the image of Sophie standing on a chair asking for brave candy. The calm method of collecting facts had done something to me. It smoothed the jagged edges of shock into a clear direction. We would not silence this. We would not pretend. We would document, we would protect. And we would, in whatever slow, costly way it took, make sure no one touched Sophie again without our say. I opened my laptop and put everything on the table like evidence in a cheap cop show, and the house shrank until every number mattered. I pulled up Sophie's medical records first, then insurance statements, then phone logs, and I watched the same dates repeat like an echo. Jun 9, Aug 21, Oct 12, Jan 15, the spiral notebook's neat handwriting lined up with hospital timestamps and urgent care check-ins exactly the way fingerprints match in a kit. My phone showed calls at 1:18 a.m. and 1:22 a.m. to the clinic on Jun 9, and the ER sticker in the file read 1:30 a.m. on that same date. The pattern wasn't messy. It was intentional and time-stamped. I made a list on a pad and started to speak the dates out loud so I wouldn't forget them. Jun 9, 1:30 a.m. ER, Aug 21, 11:05 a.m. urgent care, Oct 12, 7:40 p.m. ER, Jan 15, 2:12 a.m. ER. Each entry in Susan's notebook had a twin in the medical folder. Each little dose she recorded matched a night under fluorescent lights where Sophie lay on a tiny gurney, legs barely long enough to dangle off the edge, breathing shallow and strange. I could see the pale glow of the ceiling tiles, the nurse's braids swinging, the antiseptic smell that gets into your clothes and stays there for days. I remembered holding Sophie's hand while my left thumb hovered over a camera app because my hands shook too much to take a steady photo. The insurance statements were cruelly clear. Emergency room bills, allergist consults, a battery of blood tests, and a handful of specialist visits stacked up to roughly $28,500 in billed costs over 3 years. That number felt both abstract and punch-pure in the chest. $28,500 that were not for scraped knees or seasonal flu. They were for nights when doctors said watch and wait and we'll monitor her, and handed us a diagnosis that sometimes read only as unexplained. The pharmacy receipts were smaller but steady, about $320 for ongoing meds and specialty foods that our insurer only partially covered, small, persistent costs that kept tacking onto the total. The school emails formed their own tally. Sophie missed 52 days total over 3 years. I printed the attendance reports and sat at the kitchen table and counted sick notes that read like stanzas. Monday absent, Monday doctor's note attached, Monday fever and rash. The Mondays were a cluster that made the back of my neck cold. I circled 18 of those absences in red because the dates matched playground notes in Susan's log that often said playground day or recess right before an entry about mild vomiting or hives. There was a sick rhythm to it: weekend exposure, Monday sick call, like a cruel experiment with a schedule. Dr. Alan Cortez's notes sat beside the other files with clean, professional lines. He had written the word unexplained by hand in Sophie's chart once, the way doctors sometimes use shorthand to ask for more time or more tests. His office echoed in my head. We see hives, fever, chronic fatigue. Labs show elevated inflammatory markers but no clear trigger. The pediatrician's calm voice had been an anchor then, now it was a ledger that matched Susan's pages. Dr. Cortez had ordered more blood work, and the allergist, Dr. Claire Donovan, would later write a 12-page opinion that tied small exposures to newly developed sensitivities to tree nuts and sesame. Right then, looking at the unexplained line, the word felt less like a medical term and more like a refusal to see what the numbers already pointed to. I went through the ER notes and clicked on the scanned images until the glow made my eyes water. There was a photo of Sophie's tiny arm with a red blotch, a documented reaction on OCT12 where the nurse wrote hives noted given antihistamine. There was a glucose check one night and a note about fatigue on Jan 15 where staff wrote lethargic, parent reports recent stomach upset. My throat tightened reading those clinical lines because I could smell the fluorescent light from memory, the cheap plastic of the gurney, the iron tang of worry in the lobby as I fumbled for a card to give to a receptionist. The horror was not in a single event, it was in the mathematics of it. The neat handwriting in the spiral notebook had made a map: my scans, my phone logs, the attendance printouts, and the medical files filled in the terrain. Where I had once thought these were random childhood illnesses, the files now read like time-stamped experiments, doses, observations, results. It was the methodical, calm paper trail that made my stomach drop hard and not the shouting or the crying. When things are written down, they become truth in a way that gut instincts can't always pin down. I pressed my forehead to the cool tabletop and let the papers slide through both hands until the full weight of the numbers, the days, the cost, the dropped growth percentiles from the 65th to the low 30s, settled like a verdict. I set the spiral notebook on the table like a challenge, and Susan sat there as if she were waiting for me to applaud. Her voice was steady and small when she said, "Small doses build tolerance," like she had spooned the line out 1,000 times and it tasted righteous to her. Jessica's face went red and hard at the same time. She stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor, and the noise made Sophie look up with that quick, open curiosity that broke me every time. I demanded the why with a force I'd never used on family. "Why would you dose our child? Why would you do this?" I said it with the clean, hard edge of someone who had cataloged dates and costs and seen the curve of a wrong thing fold into a pattern. Susan didn't flinch. She smoothed the napkin under her hands and explained it like a lesson. "Exposure helps. Kids who fear things get stronger when they can face them. I did it with your mother. I did it with Logan. It's natural." The calm in her face was a new kind of violence, methodical, unsentimental. The words slid out clinical and simple, as if she were a technician reading a protocol. Jessica spat a different question, more personal and sharper. "You gave him, our daughter, peanut powder and food. You watched her get sick. You logged it. How is that help?" Her answer turned colder, as if a faucet had been opened. "You're making it sound evil. It's parenting. It's me teaching resilience. Children aren't fragile forever." Her hands were steady, the notebook inches away like a ledger of good deeds. The room felt smaller. Sophie chewed slowly, still smiling, oblivious. I noticed the light catching the edge of the log's spiral like a blade. The silence after Susan's words was thick, because no one in the room had anything to add that did not sound like a condemnation or a plea. Then the doorbell rang. It was a sound that felt like timing to me, like the world itself had decided to hand me more air to breathe before I suffocated. Robert, Susan's ex, stood on the porch with a heavy cardboard box under one arm and a look that had sat in his face for too long. He said nothing at first, just pushed the door open and set the box down with the slight sound of aged cardboard meeting tile. The box smelled of dust and the cheap cardboard scent of a storage unit that had been shut for years. Robert's hands trembled when he unlatched the tape, which was the first honest motion of the night. He pulled out folder after folder with divorce papers on top, legal margins bruised with dates and signatures. The documents were older than me, yellowing around the edges. Petitions, affidavits, a custody exchange that read like a negotiation over small freedoms. Under the stack he handed me a manila envelope, and inside were photographs. Hospital photos and ER records from decades back that showed cousin Logan at age 10 pale and swollen, with monitors stitched around him and a pediatrician's handwritten note that read post-treatment shock anaphylaxis suspected. Logan's face in the photo was round and childlike and broken in a way that made my mouth go dry. He'd been a boy in one of the photos, hospital wristband a ghostly strip, eyes closed, and a note on the back said October 2, 1994. Robert's voice lowered into a kind of confession. He had kept the box because he said he couldn't live with what was done and couldn't watch her keep doing it. I had always thought exes were bitter or small, but Robert's face had decades in it. The slow accumulation of knowing, the tiredness of someone who had swallowed bad things and stored them out of sight. He told us quietly that there had been arguments at the time, threats, a fight over what Susan called treatment and what everyone else had called dangerous. The divorce papers showed notes, a line about dangerous child treatment, a lawyer's scrawl recommending counseling. The hospital photos were enough. They turned suspicion into a documented pattern. Reading those old records unspooled me. It wasn't just our Sophie anymore. Here was history, the same rationales, the same small doses, the same plum of calm in Susan's voice that came off as sick science. I felt a moral collapse in that moment, like the roof of family loyalty had been taken off and all the beams had turned into evidence. People who once sat at holidays and laughed and passed potatoes were now names on a file. Love and loyalty looked different when you found out they were being used to justify experiments on a 10-year-old than a 5-year-old. My hands went numb holding Logan's photo, because once you see a pattern in black and white, you can't unsee the terror of how intentional it must have been. Robert didn't say he had always known, but his eyes said it plainly. He had watched and then hidden the watching, maybe out of fear, maybe out of hope. When Jessica shoved the manila envelope toward the center of the table, the spiral notebook and the hospital photos sat side by side like a before and after. This was the turning point. Suspicion had a name now. It had dates, signatures, and the weight of a past that said Susan's actions were not a mistake but a method. The house felt colder, and the only warm thing left was Sophie's hand in mine, small and trusting, which made me all the more furious and all the more certain that the file in front of me had become a case I had to take forward. We moved like people trying to outrun a slow-motion crime. I photographed every page of Susan's spiral at 8:05 p.m., my phone camera grinding shutter after shutter until the little light on the screen bathed the handwriting in white. I named each file carefully. Susan log Jun 0915 MG 2023 JPG, Susan log OG 2122 MG 2023 JPG, and I did 2 photos per page to be safe. Jessica labeled the Ziploc bags with a Sharpie, and I scanned the cinnamon tin and supplement bottle into PDFs on the counter, turning them into evidence files with exact timestamps. We uploaded everything to Google Drive, Dropbox, and a new secure iCloud folder so nothing could be lost. And we set 2-factor auth on all 3 accounts because I knew how fast things went sideways. Once the uploads finished, I matched entries to medical timestamps like I was tracing constellations. I took the dates in the notebook and pulled up ER scans. 1:30 a.m. on Jun 9 matched the Jun 9 entry. 11:05 a.m. on Aug 21 matched the playground note that said mild vomiting. I opened each PDF, held my phone camera over the timestamps and hospital labels, and made a master spreadsheet with columns for date, notebook dose, medical visit time, and notes. The spreadsheet looked clinical in its own way, rows marching down with the slow cruelty of proof. When I saw the cluster of Monday absences line up with weekend exposure notes, the spreadsheet stopped being a list and became a map. At 9:12 p.m., I left a message on our pediatrician Dr. Alan Cortez's office line in a voice I had practiced and yet felt thin. This is Daniel Hayes. We found concerning exposure notes. Need to talk about urgent testing. The receptionist's name was on the voicemail. I said it twice and hung up with my heart still loud. 18 minutes later, the nurse called back. I remember glancing at the microwave clock as she spoke. 9:30 p.m. She had been expecting a call like mine sooner or later. She squeezed an emergency allergy panel into their schedule for the next morning at 10:00 a.m. Dr. Cortez also told me to call Dr. Claire Donovan directly, and I did. Claire's voice on the phone was blunt and immediate. Get her here tomorrow. We'll run an allergy panel, CBC, specific IgE inflammatory markers now. Bring everything you have. She insisted on blood work and skin testing as soon as possible, and she promised to write a 12-page opinion if the results showed elevated markers. We forwarded a fat packet of PDFs to Evelyn Grant, our family attorney, at 10:14 p.m., emailing her secure address and copying her assistant. I attached the spiral photos, the hospital scans, and the spreadsheet and wrote a short note, evidence of intentional exposure. Please advise protective steps. Evelyn called back within an hour with a calm urgency. She told us to start a timestamped log immediately and recommended a parenting app that records entries with uneditable timestamps and cloud backups. She said it would help in court. We downloaded the app at 11:02 p.m. and I made our first entry. 11:09 p.m. found exposure log, photographed pages, notified attorney and pediatrician. We also did the practical safety things that had nothing to do with law but everything to do with keeping Sophie alive. I set 2 epinephrine auto-injectors in obvious permanent spots, one in the kitchen drawer under the counter, one in Sophie's backpack, and we kept a third in the car. I labeled snack containers with big red stickers that said "No peanuts, check ingredients." I bought epinephrine trainers and showed Jessica how to click them in a living room drill while Sophie watched, fascinated by the pretend needles clicking and the calm voice we tried to have. The outlay hit our short-term cash like a rock. Evelyn warned us legal fees would be steep and our family would face subpoenas, but she also said evidence had to be immediate and immovable. We did not leave anything to chance. By midnight, the house felt both cleaner and more fragile because everything important was saved twice and sent to people who could act. I lay out physical evidence in a neat row on the counter, the spiral notebook, the photos from the storage box, the labeled containers, and I felt a strange clarity. Documenting felt less like proof and more like building armor for Sophie. Every timestamped file, every uploaded PDF, every follow-up call was a brick. We could not undo what had happened, but we could make sure the paper trail would not let it be hidden again. They called first. Marcus Hale from CPS left a voicemail that sounded like a man who'd seen too many hard things and still kept his tone neutral. And when he said he'd be here Friday morning, I felt a brief, sick gratitude that someone official would come look at this mess. On Friday at 9:00 a.m., Marcus arrived with 2 agents and a camera, shoes whispering on my hallway floor. They photographed the cabinets with methodical slow clicks, opened drawers gently, and documented where we had placed the epinephrine auto-injectors. Marcus asked me to show him every labeled container, every sealed Ziploc bag. He logged the exact locations in a binder as if he were drawing a map for someone who might need to find them in the dark. At noon, I drove to the school because sometimes paperwork feels like an ally when everything else is chaotic. The nurse printed an attendance report and slid it across the desk like a piece of evidence you can count. 52 missed days over 3 years, and 18 of them clustered on Mondays. The printout had little blocks of dates across the top, and our daughter's name stamped in the corner. The cluster of Mondays made the back of my neck go cold. You can't stare at a calendar and not feel the implication. The nurse looked at me the way other adults did now, part sympathy, part quiet alarm, and said, "We've made notes. Notes that schools keep for safety, notes that are now part of a file someone might read in a courtroom." The legal part moved faster than I expected and slower than my head wanted. Evelyn Grant, Patricia's replacement as our attorney after Patricia retired, told us to expect pushback fast. Susan's attorney didn't hesitate. Within 48 hours, a 28-page petition landed on our doorstep asserting grandparent rights and accusing us of alienation. The petition used legal words like custodial interference and parental alienation, phrases that sound clinical until they feel like attempts to rewrite truth. Evelyn filed a cease and desist fewer than 2 days later to stop the social smear and to preserve our privacy while she prepared a defensive motion. Legal paper multiplied in the corner of my kitchen like mushrooms, each sheet stamped and official and binding. Then came the social pushback, the thing that flattened me more than the legal filings for a second. Friends of Susan, neighbors, and distant relatives posted sympathetic stories on Facebook and other platforms. Grandmothers who just want the best, tough love saved my life, and a litany of curated anecdotes designed to paint Susan as a brave, misunderstood saint. Comments flooded the posts, good intentions stacked like shrapnel. Evelyn warned that public sympathy could sway public opinion, which matters to juries. Susan's camp repeated the exposure therapy line like a mantra, and strangers started to message our accounts like they had ownership of the moral center of our family. The invasive measures increased. Evelyn warned me to expect subpoenas. Within 10 days, we had a subpoena asking for 4 years of bank records, phone records, and a long list of communication threads. The legal hourly rate landed like a second hit, roughly $220 an hour for Evelyn's time, and the binder of tasks she listed felt endless. She explained each line in a steady voice that felt like both comfort and billable time. I did the math in the kitchen: light, calls, consults, reviews, and it started to add up in a way that made my chest tighten. Legal battles don't just take time, they take the small, steady things that keep a household running. Money started leaking out faster than I ever imagined. We had immediate medical and dietary needs after the tests: specialty hypoallergenic formula, referral fills, emergency meds not fully covered. The first out-of-pocket hit was roughly $2,800 for meds and specialty foods. That number landed on one table and then another until it became real. Credit cards pulled forward, a savings line trimmed, a small loan filed to cover an upcoming month while Evelyn handled a subpoena fight. Work felt precarious because I was missing hours to meet with doctors and lawyers. Jessica was juggling calls and texts and the shifting emotional weather of her own family. The financial strain was a kind of violence all its own, quiet, steady, the kind that erodes options. Everything felt relentless and tiny at the same time. Social campaigns that shaped strangers' opinions, legal motions that required bank printouts and timestamped logs, CPS visits that inventoried our kitchen like a crime scene. Marcus Binder left with a checklist of photos and notes recommending no unsupervised contact until further findings. The school kept copies of the attendance file for their records. Evelyn kept a running tally of billable hours and protective steps. We downloaded the parenting app she recommended because it timestamped entries and made them court-ready. We began logging every interaction, every medication administration, every conversation about safety. I slept in fractured fragments, and in the mornings the house felt smaller because every corner might someday be examined under bright courtroom light. The process was invasive, expensive, and merciless in its slow grind. It ate time and money and certainty. But it also made a strange thing happen. We went from being stunned victims to deliberate actors. We documented, we secured, we answered each legal stroke with another piece of paper. The social feed would rage and settle, attorneys would trade motions, and we would pay for another round of specialty formula. In the middle of all that, Sophie began to use language we taught her: medicine and safe. And those words kept me steady when everything else felt like it might tear us apart. The courtroom smelled like old wood and printer ink and 100 folded anxieties. I sat with Jessica beside me while Sophie colored quietly in her lap, her small feet swinging and the sound of pencil on paper like a metronome cutting through everything. The judge took his time putting on glasses, eyes moving slowly over a stack of exhibits: the spiral exposure log, the folder of hospital scans, the spreadsheet I had made with timestamps, and the stack of medical bills that totaled roughly $28,500. The room felt thin and full at once, like holding your breath in a place where someone else controls the air. Dr. Claire Donovan walked in with a professional calm that made nerves settle into seats. She carried a 12-page signed medical opinion and spoke without drama. She laid out the blood work: elevated inflammatory markers, specific IgE increases, new sensitizations to tree nuts and sesame. She explained in plain terms how repeated low-dose exposures can prime an immune system in children, making reactions more likely and more severe over time. The 12-page report was clinical and precise. She referenced dates and patterns, and when she placed the pages in front of the judge, they felt like heavy, undeniable truth. Her testimony connected those neat notebook entries to real physiological changes in Sophie, and I watched the judge read and then nod slowly. Marcus Hale from CPS was next. He spoke like someone who had seen every kind of family and kept his face neutral to protect other people's pain. Marcus testified that CPS had substantiated the claim of intentional exposure and recommended no unsupervised contact between Susan and Sophie. He described the Friday home visit, the photos of the cabinets, and the logs of where we had placed epinephrine. His recommendation had weight because it came from an office designed to protect children. When he said, "substantiated" aloud, the word landed like a gavel in my chest. The court timeline overlay flickered on a screen. It was a clean graphic Evelyn had prepared: dates from Susan's spiral on one row, Sophie's ER and urgent care timestamps on another, and school absence blocks below. The overlay matched June 9 to 1:30 a.m., Aug 21 to an urgent care note, and linked clusters of Monday absences to weekend entries that mentioned playground days. The prosecutor's assistant clicked through the slides, and the pattern was a slow, relentless drumbeat you couldn't argue with. The judge flipped pages as the timeline advanced, and the physical numbers we had lived with: 52 missed school days, a growth percentile slide from about the 65th down to the low 30s, the $320 pharmacy line for ongoing meds, became the kind of evidence that a courtroom language can't ignore. Susan's attorney argued hard about grandparent rights and painted Susan as well-meaning and committed to family. He used words that sounded soft and protective: tradition, tough love, best intentions. He asked the judge to consider contact and argued our actions had been hasty. It wasn't ignorance, it was strategy. He brought forward people who told stories about bravery, and he made it sound like we had criminalized parenting. Those testimonies landed with a different kind of force because they were emotional and public, designed to tug at a jury's sense of mercy. We countered with facts. Dr. Donovan's 12-page opinion tied the notebook doses to inflammatory markers and new allergies in a way that personal stories couldn't erase. Marcus' substantiated finding held practical weight. Evelyn pushed the timeline so hard the judge had to pause and look directly at the spiral notebook as if it were a living thing. Evelyn spoke about reckless endangerment and about the duty adults have to protect children, quoting the CPS recommendations while keeping her voice steady. Evidence trumped anecdote that day. The judge read, he listened, and then he ruled. He issued a protective order for 14 months. He used the phrase reckless endangerment in his order and required a psychological evaluation before any change. He barred unsupervised contact and allowed only supervised visits under strict, court-approved conditions: a licensed supervisor, no contact with unsupervised food or kitchen access, and mandatory reporting of any health incidents. The order felt like a painful bandage, necessary and only part of healing. It secured Sophie immediately, which was everything. It also left open supervised contact conditional on evaluation outcomes, which felt like both mercy and a slow, wary reopening of a door we had slammed shut. The victory was real but bitter. Court saved Sophie from immediate risk, but it came at the price of months of legal fees, lost sleep, and a public life shredded by accusations and social smears. Evelyn's invoice started at $220 an hour and climbed like a tide. Our savings had taken hits for medical costs, the $2,800 initial outlay for meds and specialty foods, and the steady drip of bills. I missed work. Jessica lost the promotion she had been poised for because of attendance and stress. Our family's group chat fractured into alliances and recriminations. The judge's order closed one door but opened months of hearings, assessments, and slow rebuilding. On the drive home, I held Sophie's small hand and felt something raw and fierce settle into me. Protection is messy and expensive and relentless, but it is also absolute. The papers in the glove compartment were stamped and the protective order sat like armor. Sophie slept in the back seat, hair on her forehead, breathing even. That night, the world felt less like a battlefield and more like a long, careful road we would have to walk together, guarded step by guarded step. The house is quieter now, but quieter in a careful way, like the hush after a storm when everyone checks the roof for leaks. CPS closed the case with a written safety plan 2 months after the hearing. Marcus Hale signed and dated it, and the binder they left behind lists conditions and contact steps in plain language. The plan requires documented supervised visits only, immediate reporting of any medical incident, and updated safety checks every 3 months. It feels small and large at the same time. Legal paper that means Sophie can sleep without a stranger in the house. Therapy became a steady thing, not a hopeful sprint. Sophie started seeing Taylor Brooks once a week, same day, same room with a small couch and a fish tank that flickers blue. Taylor taught Sophie names for feelings and games for fear, and she taught Jessica and me how to be less reactive and more predictable. Monthly follow-up labs, ordered by Dr. Claire Donovan, slowly showed improvement. Inflammatory markers eased, specific IgE numbers dropped from the worst readings, and her energy returned in small, measurable bites. Watching the lab reports come back better felt like reading a weather forecast that slowly promises clear skies. Small wins arrived in their soft way and hit harder than I expected. One night, Sophie finished a whole dinner and didn't scan the ingredients on the label once. She ate mashed sweet potato like it was normal and didn't ask who made it or what was in it. Another Sunday, the living room turned into a paint war, small hands covered in teal and mustard, a big sheet on the floor, and Robert sitting at the table sketching with crayons beside Sophie. Robert has chosen to support us now, bringing art supplies and showing up for visits under supervision, and that ordinary joy felt like an important repair. The school became a fortress of routines instead of a source of worry. We worked with the principal to put a clear 504 plan in place, complete with an alert sticker in Sophie's file and 3 EpiPens housed in the nurse's office, one for field trips, one at the desk, and one in the front office. The staff training is documented in an email chain and certified. They practiced with trainers and logged the dates. These are not romantic victories. They are paperwork and practice, and the small, steady things that let a child go to school without a parent doing a full inspection every morning. The costs were durable and ugly. Between legal fees, medical bills, and lost wages from missed work, our combined debt sits near $52,000 now. Evelyn Grant did the best work possible and fought like a tugboat against a storm, but her invoice is real, and the psychology bills are real, and the mortgage and a missed promotion at my job left scars. My manager put me on an HR performance plan during the fight. Later, after Evelyn negotiated and FMLA paperwork was adjusted, I finally received retroactive FMLA protection and a revised path back to the promotion I had effectively lost. That fix didn't erase the months of stress or the lost opportunity, but it kept us afloat. Family lines have hardened in ways I never expected. Some relatives sided with Susan from the start, and those ties are frayed now in ways that feel permanent. Holidays are different. Some chairs at the table stay empty by design. The moral rupture is a slow, painful thing. Loyalty used to be a given, and now it is a question you ask aloud before you hand over a casserole. That rupture hurts, but it also clarified where boundaries must be placed. We learned to choose safety over performing unity. We cleared the kitchen of every hidden tin and labeled every container with bright red tape. I threw out things that made my hands shake to touch: old spice jars, cracked tins, a ribbon box of recipes where crumbs gathered like old sins. The house smells cleaner somehow. Lemon cleaner and new labels and fresh laundry. Jessica and I are exhausted in the way parents become when they have run a gauntlet and kept a small person whole, but we are aligned in a way that feels sharper and steadier than before. We argue less about tone and more about tactics. We sleep in the same battle lines and wake up to choose the same small defenses. At night, Sophie sleeps upstairs now, the light under her door a small, steady glow. I stand at her door sometimes and watch the silhouette of blankets rise and fall and feel a kind of scarred calm settle into my chest. I vow plainly without flourish, I will guard her. I will put boundaries where they must be and send the papers where they must go. I will hold her when she needs it and make the world safer in ways that cost and bruise and require stubborn, ordinary work. We are not the family we were. We are a different family now, quieter, watchful, and loyal in a way that is fierce and unambiguous.